everybody. Well, I wanted to talk to you today about the biological component to psychopathic behavior. About this guy who had was studying the brain scans of Alzheimer's patients and trying to he kind of had some interest in psychopaths, so he was had done some brain scans of psychopaths as well. But because he was doing this study on Alzheimer's, he did some controls of his family members and stuff and himself. So he had some control studies. When the people were shown roses and mountains and things like that, and then they were shown violent images, and the activity in the brain of normal people, it kind of lit up the brain all over. You know, really bright red color up here in the prefrontal cortex. And in the psychopaths, it across the board was showing, it was showing some red color, but in different parts of the brain. And then it was showing basically almost no activity in the parts of the brain that were around empathy. He's saying you got these studies mixed up. Lo and behold, figure out that the scan actually belongs to himself. It was his own brain. And so, now the most interesting part of this thing was that he said he was really behind schedule and didn't really do a lot with it right off the bat. Got that finished and went back to this. And he says he went home and he mentioned it to his wife, and she said, "Oh, it doesn't surprise me at all." Now, that to me was like, what? You know, why would that be? And he was like a very normal person. I mean, he was certainly he was narcissistic. He was certainly narcissistic. He was self-focused. He was definitely extroverted. He was a sociable person. He was, you know, enjoyed talking about himself. He was definitely a thrill-seeking person. But where it got a little questionable was that he was a thrill seeker, but that he would do things with people that he should be taking care of, like his children, that were very dangerous, subjecting his brother to the Ebola virus without telling him. And he took his kids skiing. He said it was not fun to go skiing in a lake. We had to go skiing in shark-infested waters. But the point of this was basically a regular person. He wasn't a violent person. So there is some questions about, was the brain scan even reliable and all this stuff. But then he also went on to take, did a, battery of all the tests, the hair test and all the different tests. Some discrepancy in what he proved to be, but he certainly didn't prove to be a violent guy. He wasn't a violent psychopath. So his theory about that is that it was because he was raised in a very loving home. So he was born with the predisposition to be a psychopath, to be, one of the very worst of the worst. He had the brain, conditions that if he had been abused, to have turned out to be someone, like a Hitler or like a, a really especially bad guy, like serial killer kind of guy, or because maybe he was more charming than that, not as antisocial as that. He could have been a cult leader type of a guy, but certainly like a Hitler kind of a guy. But what he is saying is that because he was loved and he was raised in this very, very nurturing, very healthy environment, that what it did was it appealed to his narcissism, because he had in him, built into him, the narcissism to want to be the best. To want to be the best at something. And because he was raised in a value system where being good, doing good things, was valued. And so he wanted to be the best at being good. So even though he maybe wasn't motivated to be a good person for the same reasons, because of empathy or an altruism or a feeling of his conscience or a feeling of guilt or a feeling of remorse, he wasn't compelled to do things for those feelings. The outcome still was the same because he was compelled to be the best at being good, and the best at being what was valued in his family, in his, in the world that he grew up in. It speaks to my ongoing theme that I talk about, it takes a village to raise someone. You can take someone who is predisposed to being a compassionate person or a good person, and you can turn them into a narcissist. I think that that's what's happened to my brother probably. I think that little kids, kids that get traumatized, something happens, and probably that's probably the case with a lot of these people that have just become impossibly abusive in our lives and problematic for us to deal with. The sad thing is that they were created. I mean, I really believe that most of the time, it is not a matter of what you're born to be. I mean, it's a matter of what is created by your environment. That's not to say there aren't predispositions. I suppose that's true. We can't argue with, if you have a brain scan that actually shows that there's brain differences. And I believe that can also be caused by trauma. That can also be caused by, I'm taking physical trauma, like concussions and brain injuries, that you can actually damage the brain and damage someone's capacity to feel empathy. You can also make someone very prone to hyper-emotionalism, that wasn't like they never cried, never showed any emotions before, and then all of a sudden they've had this brain injury. Now they're crying all the time and they're telling you how much they love you. Basically, if it's, anything under the sun can happen. That's the one thing about humans and brains and all this stuff, is anything under the sun can happen, for one thing. An interesting case of someone who, it looks like all the signs were there that if he had been born into a situation, sadly, it probably didn't even have to be that bad of a situation. He might have been able to be born into a situation that was much like any of ours and turn out to be a really bad guy. And as it is, he seemed to me to come off very much like my ex-husband. Very gregarious, very outgoing, came off as very charming, very much like my ex-husband, saying that he was essentially saved from becoming a psychopath, becoming a dangerous, violent psychopath, by the fact that he was raised in this loving environment, and still to this day very close to his mother and brother. And the guy's name, if you're interested in looking into him more, his name is Jim Fallon. He was at the University of California, my alma mater. Take a peek at that and kind of tell me what you think. Wait, do you think that that being a psychopath, being even a narcissist, is something you could be born to be, or do you think that it's a created thing? And do you think that even if you are born with predispositions for it, it can be, you can learn your way out of it? I actually do believe that. I believe that I was very aware of wanting my son, knowing that my sons were, of wanting to raise compassionate sons, and I did, but I was aware of their influences, and that I had an important role to play in making sure that they had other influences other than just a balancing influence to their father, to their grandfather. Those two especially were really all I thought at the time when I was actually becoming a mother. I just knew about those two. And of course I didn't know that they were as bad as they are. I thought that they were just a little bit on the narcissistic side. And of course we always know about there's these people that have wonderful, loving environments, that Scott Peterson, who is really a scary guy. Scott Peterson, that whole Scott Peterson, Lacey Peterson thing, I don't know if you remember that guy. He ended up killing his wife. She was pregnant. He ended up killing her, and he was having an affair with a woman named Amber. And this was happening in Northern California. That was happening, and I remember I was looking at that and realizing that guy seemed a lot like my husband. And it was right before all this cracked open for me. And I remember getting really kind of scared, thinking that guy is so much like my husband. From what I recall, his family seemed like he had a really normal, loving family. And so certainly just having a normal, loving family isn't the whole answer. I mean, there's something more, there's something, I don't know how you explain a Scott Peterson. all I have ever studied about Scott Peterson, it doesn't appear there was any abuse there. So anyway, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.